Well, there are many different views and reactions to evolution, and they were there in 1859 and afterwards, and they're still with us to the present day, although sometimes we use a slightly different language now. So maybe we can just run through these different types of reaction to evolution. The first one is usually called young earth creationism, and it refers to the fact that some people think that the world was created less than 10,000 years ago, and that all the major kinds of animals and plants were created separately, and then from those evolved very fast during the past 10,000 years all the different species that we see today. They would also say that Adam and Eve were the first humans, they were created separately, and they would also want to say that all the humans in the world today have come down from Adam and Eve. So we're all inherited from this one original pair who were created separately by God out of the dust by a miracle in the Garden of Eden. So that is the view of the young earth creationists. I have to say myself, I don't find that view very convincing. For a start, it contradicts really normal interpretations, traditional interpretations of the early chapters of Genesis. I mean, if you go back to the early church fathers like Augustine and Origen, those people who wrote a lot about the text of Scripture during the early centuries after Christ, you find that they interpreted those chapters in quite a figurative way. They didn't say they were poetry, but they interpreted them in a theological way, in a figurative way, and not in a kind of literalistic way in the way that the young earth creationist folk tend to interpret them. And obviously, the view expressed by young earth creationism is in total opposition to biology as we know it. In fact, to the whole of science as we know it. If you look at physics or in biology or chemistry, of any of these sciences, they would all support the idea of a very old Earth, which is about certainly more than 4 billion years ago, about 4.6 billion years old, and they would see also, of course, from the biological point of view, the whole of evolution is happening very gradually over a very long period of time, and there are lots of reasons to take that view seriously. But then you also have, you could call it atheistic evolution if you like, and that would be more the position held by people like Richard Dawkins. They believe that evolution in some way disproves God. They think that actually that's an alternative view to believing in God. Some people call that ultra-Darwinianism, the belief that Darwin somehow explains everything that you need to know. Then we have a third view, and I'm going to call it episodic creationism. Here it wants to say, well, yes, actually we do believe in natural selection, we do believe in evolution up to a point, but we also believe that there are lots of things that Darwinian evolution can't explain, and some of the things that we find in biology are really, really complicated. And we don't believe, says this view, that those things could have come into being just by Darwinian processes, that is to say, by genetic variation and natural selection. We don't think that could have explained all that we see in biology. So this view wants to say that now and again we have a God who kind of intervenes in the process to bring about some new entity, some new thing in biological history. Maybe the genetic code. Maybe God, by a miracle, created the genetic code to start off the very first cell. Maybe God created the very first cell, but not, and then sort of let it run after that. So the idea here is that God just comes in now and again. You have a sort of special tricks department, if you like, where God does special tricks at certain times, which we wouldn't be able to really investigate scientifically. And there's one particular form of episodic creationism called intelligent design. Intelligent design wants to say that there are, as we were saying, certain things that are very complicated in biology. That's certainly true. And so that's a kind of episodic creationism, because they then want to go on and say, well, therefore these things must be designed, there must be a designer who brought those kind of complicated things into being, and we think probably that designer is God. I actually think that's a pretty feeble kind of argument myself, I'll be honest. And the reason I think it's feeble is because, if you like, this is a God of the gaps, or a designer of the gaps. And the attempt here seems to be to find gaps in our present scientific knowledge. And I just think that's lazy. That's a lazy kind of God, because the God I believe in is a God who creates everything, who's in charge of everything. He's the author of the whole of creation. He's not just coming in to create little bits now and again. Let's think about a fourth view. Sometimes people call it theistic evolution. Sometimes people call it evolutionary creationism. And this view says, well, actually we do believe in God as a creator. We believe that God is the author of the whole of creation. He's the one who writes the book of creation, if you like, and indeed he gives it meaning and purpose. And there's a God who has an ultimate purpose for the whole universe in general and for this planet in particular, and of course for our own lives. So this is the traditional Christian understanding of creation. It's about what philosophers call ontology, which means why do things exist? It's about existence. Why is there a planet there? Why is there a universe there? And Christians want to say, well, because God has brought it into being and sustains it by his power, because he has reasons for that and he has purposes for doing that. Now, once you accept that rather traditional view of creation, then all that means is that the theories that we have as scientists, whether we're talking about the Big Bang, how the universe came into being, whether talking about evolutionary biology, these are simply our descriptions of what God has done and continues to do out there in the natural world, in the created order, and we're simply trying to describe God's actions and his activities. And so from that perspective, that's why we call it theistic evolution. It's not that someone who believes in theistic evolution has a different view of the science from an atheist. No, we all believe the same thing. We all believe Darwinian evolution. So the Christian would want to say, I would want to say, well, ultimately all of this biology, this wonderful biology that I described in my laboratory, is about the actions of God. And if you think about it, if you were reading a book, I mean, you wouldn't go to the 9th chapter in the 2nd paragraph and say, aha, here I found evidence for the creator, for the author of this book. That would be a little bit odd, wouldn't it? I mean, either a book has an author or it doesn't. And surely if a book has an author, then that refers to the whole book, not just to little bits of it. And so that's why I'm critical of the other three views that I expressed, and would much prefer to be a theistic evolutionist who just sees all of the outworkings of the world in which we live as an aspect of God's good creation.